Book 2, Chapter 2. Clarence Glyndon was a young man of fortune, not large, but easy and independent. His parents were dead, and his nearest relation was an only sister, left in England under the care of her aunt, and many years younger than himself. Early in life he had evinced considerable promise in the art of painting, and rather from enthusiasm than any pecuniary necessity for a profession, he determined to devote himself to a career in which the English artist generally commences with rapture and historical composition, to conclude with avaricious calculation and portraits of Alderman Simpkins. Glyndon was supposed by his friends to possess no inconsiderable genius, but it was of a rash and presumptuous order. He was averse from continuous and steady labor, and his ambition rather sought to gather the fruit than to plant the tree. In common with many artists in their youth, he was fond of pleasure and excitement, yielding with little forethought to whatever impressed his fancy or appealed to his passions. He had traveled through the more celebrated cities of Europe with the avowed purpose and sincere resolution of studying the divine masterpieces of his art. But in each, pleasure had too often allured him from ambition, and a living beauty distracted his worship from the senseless canvas. Brave, adventurous, vain, restless, inquisitive, he was ever involved with wild projects and pleasant dangers, the creature of impulse and the slave of imagination. It was then the period when a feverish spirit of change was working its way to that hideous mockery of human aspirations, the Revolution of France. And from the chaos into which were already jarring the sanctities of the world's venerable belief, arose many shapeless and unformed chimeras. Need I remind the reader that, while that was the day for polished skepticism and affected wisdom, it was the day also for the most egregious credulity and the most mystical superstitions, the day in which magnetism and magic found converts amongst the disciples of Diderot, when prophecies were current in every mouth, when the salon of a philosophical deist was converted into a Heraclea, in which necromancy professed to conjure up the shadows of the dead, when the crozier and the book were ridiculed, and Mesmer and Cagliostro were believed. In that heliacal rising, heralding the new sun before which all vapors were to vanish, stalked from their graves in the feudal ages all the phantoms that had flitted before the eyes of Paracelsus and Agrippa. Dazzled by the dawn of the Revolution, Glyndon was yet more attracted by its strange accompaniments, and natural it was with him, as with others, that the fancy which ran riot amidst the hopes of a social utopia should grasp with avidity all that promised, out of the dusty tracks of the beaten science, the bold discoveries of some marvelous Elysium. In his travels he had listened with vivid interest, at least, if not with implicit belief, to the wonders told of each more renowned ghost-seer, and his mind was therefore prepared for the impression which the mysterious Zanoni, at first sight, had produced upon it. There might be another cause for this disposition to credulity. A remote ancestor of Glyndon's, on the mother's side, had achieved no inconsiderable reputation as a philosopher and alchemist. Strange stories were afloat concerning this wise progenitor. He was said to have lived to an age far exceeding the allotted boundaries of mortal existence, and to have preserved to the last the appearance of middle life. He had died at length, it was supposed, of grief for the sudden death of a great-grandchild, the only creature he had ever appeared to love. The works of this philosopher, though rare, were extant, and found in the library of Glyndon's home. Their Platonic mysticism, their bold assertions, the high promises that might be detected through their figurative and typical phraseology, had early made a deep impression on the young imagination of Clarence Glyndon. His parents, not alive to the consequences of encouraging fancies which the very enlightenment of the age appeared to them sufficient to prevent or dispel, were fond, in the long winter nights, of conversing on the traditional history of this distinguished progenitor. and Clarence thrilled with the fearful pleasure when his mother playfully detected a striking likeness between the features of the young heir and the faded portrait of the alchemist that overhung their mantelpiece, and was the boast of their household and the admiration of their friends. The child is, indeed, more often than we think of, the father of the man. I have said that Glyndon was fond of pleasure. Facile, as genius ever must be, to cheerful impression, his careless artist life, ere artist life settles down to labor, had wandered from flower to flower. He had enjoyed, almost to the reaction of satiety, the gay revelries of Naples, when he fell in love with the face and voice of Viola Pisani. But his love, like his ambition, was vague and desultory. It did not satisfy his whole heart and fill up his whole nature, not from want of strong and noble passions, but because his mind was not yet matured and settled enough for their development. As there is one season for the blossom, another for the fruit, so it is not till the bloom of fancy begins to fade that the heart ripens to the passions that the bloom precedes and foretells. Joyous alike at his lonely easel or amidst his boon companions, he had not yet known enough of sorrow to love deeply. For man must be disappointed with the lesser things of life before he can comprehend the full value of the greatest. It is the shallow sensualists of France who, in their salon language, call love a folly. Love, better understood, is wisdom. Besides, the world was too much with Clarence Glyndon. His ambition of art was associated with the applause and estimation of that miserable minority of the surface that we call the public. Like those who deceive, he was ever fearful of being himself the dupe. He distrusted the sweet innocence of Viola. He could not venture the hazard of seriously proposing marriage to an Italian actress. But the modest dignity of the girl, and something good and generous in his own nature, had hitherto made him shrink from any more worldly but less honorable designs. Thus the familiarity between them seemed rather that of kindness and regard than passion. He attended the theatre. He stole behind the scenes to converse with her. He filled his portfolio with countless sketches of a beauty that charmed him as an artist as well as lover. And day after day he floated on through a changing sea of doubt and irresolution, of affection and distrust. The last, indeed, constantly sustained against his better reason by the sober admonitions of Mervale, a matter-of-fact man. The day following that eve on which this section of my story opens, Glyndon was riding alone by the shores of the Neapolitan Sea, on the other side of the cavern of Posillipo. It was past noon. The sun had lost its early fervor, and a cool breeze sprung up voluptuously from the sparkling sea. Bending over a fragment of stone near the roadside, he perceived the form of a man, and when he approached, he recognized Zanoni. The Englishman saluted him courteously. "Have you discovered some antique?" said he, with a smile. "They are common as pebbles on this road." "No," replied Zanoni. "It was but one of those antiques that have their date, indeed, from the beginning of the world, but which nature eternally withers and renews." So saying, he showed Glyndon a small herb with a pale blue flower, and then placed it carefully in his bosom. "You are an herbalist?" "I am. It is, I am told, a study full of interest." "To those who understand it, doubtless." "Is the knowledge, then, so rare?" "Rare! The deeper knowledge is perhaps rather among the arts, lost to the modern philosophy of commonplace and surface. Do you imagine there was no foundation for those traditions which come dimly down from remoter ages, as shells now found on the mountain-tops inform us where the seas have been? What was the old Colchian magic but the minute study of nature in her lowliest works? What the fable of Medea but a proof of the powers that may be extracted from the germ and leaf? The most gifted of all the priestcrafts, the mysterious sisterhoods of Cuth, concerning whose incantations learning vainly bewilders itself amidst the maze of legends, sought in the meanest herbs what, perhaps, the Babylonian sages explored in vain amidst the loftiest stars. Tradition yet tells you that there existed a race who could slay their enemies from afar, without weapon, without movement. The herb that ye tread on may have deadlier powers than your engineers can give to their mightiest instruments of war. Can you guess that to these Italian shores, the old Circaean promontory, came the wise from the farthest east, to search for plants and simples which your pharmacists of the counter would fling from them as weeds? The first herbalists, the master chemists of the world, were the tribe that the ancient reverence called by the name of Titans. I remember once, by the Hebrus, in the reign of... But this talk, said Zanoni, checking himself abruptly and with a cold smile, serves only to waste your time and my own. He paused, looked steadily at Glyndon, and continued, Young man, think you that vague curiosity will supply the place of earnest labor? I read your heart. You wish to know me, and not this humble herb. But pass on. Your desire cannot be satisfied. You have not the politeness of your countrymen, said Glyndon, somewhat discomposed. Suppose I were desirous to cultivate your acquaintance. Why should you reject my advances? I reject no man's advances, answered Zanoni. I must know them if they so desire, but me, in return, they can never comprehend. If you ask my acquaintance, it is yours, but I would warn you to shun me. And why are you, then, so dangerous? On this earth, men are often, without their own agency, fated to be dangerous to others. If I were to predict your fortune by the vain calculations of the astrologer, I should tell you, in their despicable jargon, that my planet sat darkly in your house of life. Cross me not, if you can avoid it. I warn you now, for the first time and last. You despise the astrologers, yet you utter a jargon as mysterious as theirs. I neither gamble nor quarrel. Why, then, should I fear you? As you will, I have done. Let me speak frankly. Your conversation last night interested and perplexed me. I know it. Minds like yours are attracted by mystery. Glyndon was piqued at these words, though in the tone in which they were spoken there was no contempt. I see you do not consider me worthy of your friendship. Be it so. Good day. Zanoni coldly replied to the salutation, and as the Englishman rode on, returned to his botanical employment. The same night, Glyndon went, as usual, to the theatre. He was standing behind the scenes watching Viola, who was on the stage in one of her most brilliant parts. The house resounded with applause. Glyndon was transported with a young man's passion and a young man's pride. This glorious creature, thought he, may yet be mine. He felt, while thus wrapped in delicious reverie, a slight touch upon his shoulder. He turned and beheld Zanoni. You are in danger, said the latter. Do not walk home tonight, or if you do, go not alone. Before Glyndon recovered from his surprise, Zanoni disappeared, and when the Englishman saw him again, he was in the box of one of the Neapolitan nobles, where Glyndon could not follow him. Viola now left the stage, and Glyndon accosted her with an unaccustomed warmth of gallantry. But Viola, contrary to her gentle habit, turned with an evident impatience from the address of her lover. Taking aside Gianetta, who was her constant attendant at the theatre, she said in an earnest whisper, "Oh, Gianetta, he is here again, the stranger of whom I spoke to thee, and again he alone of the whole theatre withholds from me his applause." "Which is he, my darling?" said the old woman, with fondness in her voice. "He must indeed be dull, not worth a thought." The actress drew Gianetta near to the stage, and pointed out to her a man in one of the boxes, conspicuous amongst all else by the simplicity of his dress and the extraordinary beauty of his features. "Not worth a thought, Gianetta," repeated Viola, "not worth a thought. Alas, not to think of him seems the absence of thought itself." The prompter summoned the Signora Pisani. "Find out his name, Gianetta," she said, moving slowly to the stage and passing by Glyndon, who gazed at her with a look of sorrowful reproach. The scene on which the actress now entered was that of the final catastrophe, wherein all her remarkable powers of voice and art were preeminently called forth. The house hung on every word with breathless worship, but the eyes of Viola sought only those of one calm and unmoved spectator. She exerted herself as if inspired. Zanoni listened and observed her with an attentive gaze, but no approval escaped his lips. No emotion changed the expression of his cold and half-disdainful aspect. Viola, who was in the character of one who loved, but without return, never felt so acutely the part she played. Her tears were truthful, her passion that of nature. It was almost too terrible to behold. She was borne from the stage, exhausted and insensible, amidst such a tempest of admiring rapture as continental audiences alone can raise. The crowd stood up, handkerchiefs waved, garlands and flowers were thrown on the stage, men wiped their eyes, and women sobbed aloud. "By heavens," said a Neapolitan of great rank, "she has fired me beyond endurance. Tonight, this very night, she shall be mine. You have arranged all, Mascari." "All, signor, and if this young Englishman should attend her home." "The presuming barbarian! As I before told thee, let him bleed for his folly. I will have no rival." "But an Englishman! There is always a search after the bodies of the English." "Fool! Is not the sea deep enough, or the earth secret enough, to hide one dead man? Our ruffians are silent as the grave itself. And I, who would dare to suspect, to arraign the prince? See to it, this night. I trust him to you. Robbers murder him, you understand. The country swarms with them. Plunder and strip him, the better to favor such report. Take 3 men. The rest shall be my escort." Mascari shrugged his shoulders and bowed submissively. The streets of Naples were not then so safe as now, and carriages were both less expensive and more necessary. The vehicle which was regularly engaged by the young actress was not to be found. Giannetta, too aware of the beauty of her mistress and the number of her admirers, to contemplate without alarm the idea of their return on foot, communicated her distress to Glyndon, and he besought Viola, who recovered but slowly, to accept his own carriage. Perhaps before that night she would not have rejected so slight a service. Now, for some reason or other, she refused. Glyndon, offended, was retiring sullenly, when Giannetta stopped him. "Stay, signor," she said coaxingly. "The dear signora is not well. Do not be angry with her. I will make her accept your offer." Glyndon stayed, and after a few moments spent in expostulation on the part of Giannetta and resistance on that of Viola, the offer was accepted. Giannetta and her charge entered the carriage, and Glyndon was left at the door of the theatre to return home on foot. The mysterious warning of Zanoni then suddenly occurred to him. He had forgotten it in the interest of his lover's quarrel with Viola. He thought it now advisable to guard against danger foretold by lips so mysterious. He looked round for someone he knew. The theatre was disgorging its crowds. They hustled and jostled and pressed upon him, but he recognized no familiar countenance. While pausing irresolute, he heard Mervale's voice calling on him, and, to his great relief, discovered his friend making his way through the throng. "I have secured you," said he, "a place in the Count Citoxa's carriage. Come along, he is waiting for us." "How kind in you! How did you find me out?" "I met Zanoni in the passage. Your friend is at the door of the theatre," said he. "Do not let him go home on foot tonight. The streets of Naples are not always safe. I immediately remembered that some of the Calabrian bravos have been busy within the city the last few weeks, and suddenly meeting Citoxa. But here he is." Further explanation was forbidden, for they now joined the Count. As Glyndon entered the carriage and drew up the glass, he saw 4 men standing apart by the pavement, who seemed to eye him with attention. "Cospetto!" cried one. "That is the Englishman!" Glyndon imperfectly heard the exclamation as the carriage drove on. He reached home in safety. The familiar and endearing intimacy which always exists in Italy between the nurse and the child she had reared, and which the Romeo and Juliet of Shakespeare in no way exaggerates, could not but be drawn yet closer than usual in a situation so friendless as that of the orphan actress. In all that concerned the weaknesses of the heart, Giannetta had large experience, and when, 3 nights before, Viola, on returning from the theatre, had wept bitterly, the nurse had succeeded in extracting from her a confession that she had seen one, not seen for 2 weary and eventful years, but never forgotten, and who, alas, had not evinced the slightest recognition of herself. Giannetta could not comprehend all the vague and innocent emotions that swelled this sorrow, but she resolved them all, with her plain, blunt understanding, to the one sentiment of love. And here she was well fitted to sympathize and console. Confidant to Viola's entire and deep heart she never could be, for that heart never could have words for all its secrets. But such confidence as she could obtain, she was ready to repay by the most unreproving pity and the most ready service. "Have you discovered who he is?" asked Viola, as she was now alone in the carriage with Giannetta. "Yes, he is the celebrated Signor Zanoni, about whom all the great ladies have gone mad. They say he is so rich. Oh, so much richer than any of the Inglesi. Not but what that Signor Glinden—" "Cease," interrupted the young actress. "Zanoni! Speak of the Englishman no more." The carriage was now entering that more lonely and remote part of the city in which Viola's house was situated, when it suddenly stopped. Giannetta, in alarm, thrust her head out of the window, and perceived, by the pale light of the moon, that the driver, torn from his seat, was already pinioned in the arms of 2 men. The next moment the door was opened violently, and a tall figure, masked and mantled, appeared. "Fear not, fairest Pisani," said he gently. "No ill shall befall you." As he spoke, he wound his arm round the form of the fair actress, and endeavored to lift her from the carriage. But Giannetta was no ordinary ally. She thrust back the assailant with a force that astonished him, and followed the shock by a volley of the most energetic reprobation. The mask drew back, and composed his disordered mantle. "By the body of Bacchus," said he, half laughing, "she is well protected. Here, Luigi, Giovanni, seize the hag. Quick! Why loiter ye?" The mask retired from the door, and another and yet taller form presented itself. "Be calm, Viola Pisani," said he in a low voice. "With me you are indeed safe." He lifted his mask as he spoke, and showed the noble features of Zanoni. "Be calm, be hushed. I can save you." He vanished, leaving Viola lost in surprise, agitation, and delight. There were, in all, 9 masks. 2 were engaged with the driver, 1 stood at the head of the carriage horses, a 4th guarded the well-trained steeds of the party. 3 others, besides Zanoni and the one who had first accosted Viola, stood apart by a carriage drawn to the side of the road. To these 3 Zanoni motioned. They advanced. He pointed towards the first mask, who was, in fact, the prince, and to his unspeakable astonishment, the prince was suddenly seized from behind. "Treason!" he cried. "Treason among my own men! What means this?" "Place him in his carriage. If he resists, his blood will be on his own head," said Zanoni calmly. He approached the men who had detained the coachman. "You are outnumbered and outwitted," said he. "Join your lord. You are 3 men. We are 6. Armed to the teeth. Thank our mercy that we spare your lives. Go." The men gave way, dismayed. The driver remounted. "Cut the traces of their carriage and the bridles of their horses," said Zanoni as he entered the vehicle containing Viola, which now drove on rapidly, leaving the discomfited ravisher in a state of rage and stupor impossible to describe. "Allow me to explain this mystery to you," said Zanoni. "I discovered the plot against you. No matter how, I frustrated it thus. The head of this design is a nobleman, who has long persecuted you in vain. He and 2 of his creatures watched you from the entrance of the theatre, having directed 6 others to await him on the spot where you were attacked. Myself and 5 of my servants supplied their place, and were mistaken for his own followers. I had previously ridden alone to the spot where the men were waiting, and informed them that their master would not require their services that night. They believed me, and accordingly dispersed. I then joined my own band, whom I had left in the rear. You know all. We are at your door."